did I see Te Tiriti o Waitangi implemented in the school? If you did, how do they do that? It might be through their kapahaka, which they probably do once a week. It might be through introduction of a kupu in the first week, in the first day of the week. Our kupu today might be manakitanga, because it's part of the school, one of my school values. Or it could be aroha, because it makes up the Favona Awa. I'm just remembering some of the things that I remember from schools that I went to. It might be being a kaitiaki. How did they explore those concepts in the school? Because that satisfies Te Tiriti o Waitangi. What do you think? Does it satisfy Te Tiriti o Waitangi?
Yeah.
When you see those elements being explored in the school?
Yes.
Then that's an education experience I can talk about. All right? Of how our standards was explored in that way. So that's an example of how the selected framework was examined. Right? That's you examining Te Tiriti o Waitangi underneath our standards and how it's being implemented in the school. My next part in our standards is professional learning. Did I see professional? Yeah.
So when you're like the example that you're using, so when you're explaining like Te Tiriti o Waitangi or the next professional learning, are we making them like when we lay it out in our
Yeah.
are we making them points?
Don't write them in bullet points.
Oh,
Write them as examples.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely
okay.
their point there. So if you're talking about, I saw, for example, you might say, because your chosen framework is our codes and our standards, but in this example, I'm going to focus on our standard. The first part of the standard is Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So so in your example, you can share, how Te Tiriti o Waitangi was explored in the school. That's an education experience that you are sharing right there. The next one is professional learning. Did you see professional learning in the school? You definitely would have seen professional learning in the school in some way, right? It might have been through structured literacy, if that was you. It might have been some kind of math learning that was conducted in a whole staff meeting. It might have been something to do with a policy in the school, all right? So that's part of professional learning in the whole school. So you can talk about an example of how that was implemented in the school. And that's part of how our standards are being implemented in the school. Okay? The next one is professional relationships in our standards. How was that explored in the school? When talking about professional relationships, talking about relationships between, the leaders in the school, the principal, the DP, the AP. Yeah, the principals, the DP, and the AP, and how they connect with the rest of the staff, and how does even the poafina connect with yourselves, student, teacher, trainees. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or even professional relationships with external organizations that comes through. Yeah, no, not yet, not parents yet, but external organizations that come in to help facilitate programs in the school.
Oh, like social workers.
Yeah, social workers,
Nurses?
nurses.
No. Oh yeah. Those who help with,
those that come in and do checks, like health checks and in the community. Those are external stakeholders of the school. So that's part of professional relationships. And then of course the most important is parents and whānau. How do they engage and establish those professional relationships with parents and whānau? How do they do it? Through newsletters, through term events, through celebration of Pacific Language Weeks, which starts in 22, or, you know what I mean? Lots of opportunities for that to be seen right across the school that you would have experienced while you were there for 5 weeks. All right? You can't tell me, I didn't. I'm like, oh, no, you did. Every day. The next part of our standards will be learning focused culture. So now you can zero into your actual classroom itself. How was the learning focused culture established in your classroom? this is now for you coming down to your Pauafina. How did they establish learning focused culture in your classroom? How did they do that? It might have been through establishing their class expectations.
Routines.
Pardon me?
Like
Routines. What were their routines? What were the usual routines that they did repeatedly over and over and over again throughout their time? All right, that's that's learning focused culture. I'm working through the standards that as I can remember. And the next one is design for learning, or design. So this now comes down to your Pauafina. Planning. If they're part of a hub, did they plan as a hub? All right, and it was planning shared with everybody else across all your levels. In your final group, how was that implemented in a classroom? And then the last part, I think, is teaching. Now this comes back to your Pauafina, teaching. So right now I'm referring to our standards, which is in your Te Mai Whakato booklet. Go back and have a look at those bullet points in there. If you think about, what am I going to write about? Go back into your Te Mai Whakato booklet, have a look at the standards of teaching, which is in there, and then talk to those points underneath each aspect of your Te Mai Whakato booklet, because that will give you some ideas to think about when it comes to your Pauafina. When they were teaching, did you see the 4 teaching approaches that I've talked about? The modeling, the shared, the guided, and the independent. Did you see that? That's why I refer to it all the time, because that's part of your pedagogy. Pedagogy is how do you teach and how do you learn.
So what do we look into my Whakato?
If you look into my Whakato, in one of the expectations, you'll see the standards of teaching.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to, because those are the things you guys are assessed against.
Even when we fill out the
Yeah, your self-reflection. Yeah, that's part of it too for your Te Mai Whakato.
yeah,
That's it. So now I'm checking on you. Do you know what it is? Okay, don't just write it up and then forget about it. Those things come to scenes right now, as we're talking right now. Okay, so I've just outlined a number of personal, more than 2 actually.
yeah.
And I'm talking only about one framework, our codes and our standards. That's one example of it. And then you might choose tapasa. In tapasa, there are 3 competencies, or it's called Ture 1, Ture 2, and Ture 3. Did you see those aspects in your school? All right. Or you might be talking about your framework, which is how did you see that from your own? So your education experience doesn't just, because most of you were teacher aides before you came here. You can refer to your teacher aide experience, because that's an education experience of how you saw that. And you speak to those bullet points in your outlined in the tapasa document, outlined in the kahikitia document, outlined in our codes and our standards, outlined in Shina Cameron, outlined in effective literacy. All right, you speak to those points for part B, and you bring those experiences alive by referring to how you are examining your framework. If it's a Shina Cameron framework, you look at how was this established. Did I see this in the school, in the classroom? Again, those contexts. That's part B. Remember, this aramato is how many words?
1,500.
1,500. So I've given you a number of examples. I'm saying word count increasing. Streamline it, cut it down.
Yeah.
If you can use one word to say 3 things,
I'll just double check.
all right? If you can say one word, you can use one word that's communicating 3 different things, and use that one word. If you're using the New Zealand curriculum, tone it down. For example, the word New Zealand curriculum is 2 words. So you might use it once above, and then you might say NZC.
With the NZC next to it.
And then, when you've used New Zealand curriculum, if it is one of the documents, the first time you use New Zealand curriculum, the word, write the whole word out, and then in brackets, put the acronyms NZC. So that means the rest of your writing, you're not going to say New Zealand curriculum, you're going to say NZC, NZC, NZC. So I know what you're referring to. If you are using Shina Cameron, use acronyms for it. If you're using effective literacy for learning,
Sheena Cameron. It's not Sheila Cameron. Like, is it?
How do you mean?
Like her, the book itself, or do we just?
You can
Just call
because
it
you can
as-
refer to this Shinnik because it is she's the author for all of those
Yeah.
books, so you can refer to it. But then you can make up your own acronym for if it's a reading one, then you refer to the reading. If it's a writing one,
Just
then you
make sure
refer
the
to
acronym's
just
there.
make sure that you have the correct acronym for it. And again, share your education experience. And when you are outlining your examples, you are showing me that you are examining how that framework was applied in the school. Part B. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Any part-time. All right, shall we talk about part C?
Yeah, yes, but
Because some of you might be ready to move on to part C. Just gonna pull up my booklet.
Yeah, or else it would have leaked in your bag. And it stains.
Sorry, everybody. What I've talked about there is actually part C. Because that's where you are sharing your personal
the
education
one that
experiences.
you just
Yeah, what I've just talked about was part C.
That's part C.
Okay?
Yeah.
Apologies about that. So now I'm going to come back to part B. Part B is, so same thing, but now you, without you sharing your personal experiences. It could be how, it says here, an in-depth examination of two selected of your framework and talk about the application in a primary school setting. So you are talking about this in a hypothetical situation. For example, if you were a leader of a school, let's put it in a bit of a context. How would you see our codes and our standards implemented in the school? How would you do that in a primary school setting? Let's talk about it from that context. Yeah? So for part B, imagine that you are the leader of the school. You're the principal of the school. How would you, Maxine, implement, what was your framework again? Yeah. How would you implement your frameworks in your school? That, that connects to the different contexts that I shared with you. The teaching, the principal, and the whole school, that's principal all the way down to classroom teachers, external stakeholders, which are your, whoever it is that connects to the school, your parents and whānau, and of course the tauira itself. How will you be able to talk about, share, hypothetically, if you are the leader of a school, how am I going to see our codes and our standards in these different ways?
So we're just talking about it.
Yes. How would you
Whereas
see
in
it
part C we'll be talking
from
to
your experience in a school? This way, because you've been in a school, right? You know what our codes and our standards are. But now, how could you implement that?
It seems like their responsibility, being like a principal and assistant, is what
Yeah.
they really do.
It could be, but then how would you implement Te Tiriti o Waitangi, professional learning, professional relationships, learning focused culture, design for learning and teaching? How would you do that in a school? That's you speaking about it from that context. So you might speak about it from, like I said, from a leader's point of view. All right, how would you see that being implemented in your school? Or if that's too big for you to think about, then think about a classroom teacher. I think it's probably too big for you to put yourself in a leader's position. So put yourself in a classroom as a classroom teacher. How would you implement our standards in your classroom?
I will be the Katiaki Tama.
Yeah, that's right. How would you do that? How would you implement Te Tiriti o Waitangi in your classroom with your students? How would you implement professional learning in your classroom? This is what part B is about. You are
So
examining.
for like example, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, ensuring you're including karakia or kupu Māori or
Yeah, those are examples of how Te Tiriti is being
oh yeah,
satisfied.
okay, cool.
And how would you do professional learning? What's an example?
Planning. Professional.
No, that's not planning.
Collaboration with
Collaboration with
like team leader what is it like
syndicate.
syndicate meetings,
Okay, that's just one example. What could be another example of professional learning?
PDL,
PDL.
like
Definitely.
investigating what else is out there that might be relevant to what you want to know,
That's right.
and going back to like senior leadership and say, hey,
Yeah.
this course is available. Can I?
That's part of it.
Be applied.
Also, being up to date with Ministry of Education documentation requirements. It might also be being familiar with policies in your school. It's like reading up on policies again, like for in particular health and safety policies. There are new things coming out through the Ministry of Education that you have to be mindful of, or not. There are things coming out that may not necessarily agree with your
Yeah,
philosophy
just up to date
or who
with
you are as a
trends.
person. It's like, no thanks. You know, but how do you keep yourself safe in that sense? That's part of your professional learning. Kapai? Professional relationships, what's that?
Making sure you're having conversations with whānau all the time, talking to colleagues.
How do you do that now? Wait, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you are keeping whānau and parents up to date? Hey.
Yeah.
So those are
making
things
sure
that you have to
they're
think about
coming
when
in
you are.
and-
That's now you examining how that framework is being implemented in my classroom. Okay, so let's speak about it from a classroom context. And then let's come down to learning focused culture. How do you establish a learning focused culture in your classroom?
Okay, I'll ask the boy how do you pronounce your name properly to start off with? Just
Okay.
Pronouncing their name
Okay, so
properly.
if that's important, absolutely. But before you pronouncing somebody's name, how do you establish a learning focused culture? Because you have to be okay with the behaviors that's happening in your classroom. If you're not okay with that, then what do you do? Do you just allow anybody to just walk in your
To
classroom?
know everyone's culture, knowing your learners.
Establishing
Really.
routines or
Yeah,
expectations.
establish routines and expectations. That will definitely come. Establish those routines and expectations. For example, when I was a teacher in college, all my seniors lined up outside. I don't care who you are. Line up outside, and then when they know I'm ready, I will come and tell them. Yeah, I am so happy in the way that you're lining up right now. You look beautiful, you look immaculate. I can see that you've tied it up after morning tea, not sweating profusely, not making a classroom stink. You've tied it up yourself before you came to line up here, and I'm so grateful. Please go inside the classroom and wait behind your desks. That's it. So they walk in and they stand behind their chairs. Awesome, thank you. Okay, in the next couple of minutes, I'd like you to get organized. I'm gonna put my timer on. Grab your writing book, your reading book, your textbook, pen, blue pen, everything that you need for this lesson. 2 minutes starts now. 1 more minute. 30 seconds. 10 seconds. 2 and 1, everybody's back. Sitting behind the desk. Look around. Looks like you're missing something. Looks like you are. Oh, I can see you've got everything. All right. In a hall. That's just the first 3 minutes of class.
All your instructions are clear.
Well done. That's me being deliberate in my teaching. I haven't even started teaching, but I'm just wanting certain key things to be sorted out before I actually start my lesson. And then they sit down. Okay, everybody. No, don't touch your books yet. Now that I'm happy, okay, open up your books, write down the learning intention I've already got up on the board, and then I will start. You see what I mean? But if you just go, and if you're going right from the very beginning, oh, it's going from one ear and it's definitely going out the other. No one's listening. because you're all over the place. Therefore, they're also going to be all over the place. So me establishing a learning focused culture helps to settle things down, most importantly for them. Right? So that when we start the learning, I'm still not giving instructions that I talked about 3 minutes ago. That's all sorted. I'm now ready for teaching and they're ready for learning. Okay? One thing I've always said is don't rush the process. Just slow it down. It's okay. That's an example of me establishing a learning focused culture. Kapai?
Yeah.
And the last one, second to last, design for learning, that's my own planning. Am I prepared in my planning? Have I got my resources? Have I got this? Have I got that? Have I got my planning documents? Have I shared my planning document with my syndicate leader? Have I sorted out all my resources before I started? Have I thought about all my stuff? Have I done my research into my planning before I started? Have I done my teacher moves? Because that will help me be settled, and therefore my children will be settled as well as a result of that. That's my design for learning. And now comes my teaching, which is the last part of our standards. Now comes my teaching part. Have I done my teacher moves? All right? Am I clear with am I teaching within my time frame, 20 minutes? Am I allowing my tauira to practice what I have just taught? There's no point in teaching, and then they haven't had a chance to practice, because again, it's not been consolidated in their minds, because they haven't had a chance to practice with your graphic organizers or your exercises, or they haven't practiced with a work example for math. All right? Because if they haven't practiced, they haven't made a connection to it. Therefore, they won't have any prior knowledge to go away with. And then you're going to have to do the whole thing again the next day, because you didn't do it the first time. Because you haven't paid attention to those things, now you're creating more work for yourself. Probably going to get frustrated about it. Well, it comes back to you as a kayako. You see what I mean? So all those examples of deliberate acts of teaching. But when you take the time to spend developing those pedagogical tools, because they're part of pedagogy, and in my teaching, am I satisfying the 4 teaching approaches? Have I modeled to the class? And if I've modeled, am I now inviting my tauira to share the teaching with me? That's my second teaching approach now. Right? Are they sharing in my teaching now because they understand some concepts already from the modeling that I did earlier? Now they can help me teach the next part of my lesson, because they've connected, they've made connections, they've got prior knowledge to work with. All right? Now when I move into my guided group, I'm now reiterating what I did in my modeling, what I did in my shared, and now I am expanding on it further in my small guided session here in front of me. See what I mean? So that I can trust them to be able to do it by themselves. Or they will trust themselves that I got it. I can go, can I go do this by myself now? Absolutely, go ahead. All right? And it also gives me opportunities to focus on those target students who are probably not catching on as fast as they want to be, but that's okay. Because now that everybody's had an experience of the 4 teaching approaches, modeled, shared, guided, and independent, now I have the opportunity to meet up with those target students in front of me. That's our codes and that's our standards for in a classroom talk context, and that's part B. Is that clear? So I've done part A is done, and that's the part B I just talked about. So it's you implementing your framework in a classroom context. If you're doing New Zealand curriculum, you might want to think about how are you implementing the key competencies. If you're doing New Zealand curriculum, you might want to think about how am I implementing the key competencies in my classroom context. That's thinking, that participating, contributing, that's symbols, managing self. Am I missing anything?
Participation.
Yeah, I've done that.
Trump.
So I've done thinking, I've done participating, contributing, I've done managing self, and I've done
Relating.
symbols. Relating to others, kapai, last one. So you can, so if you're doing New Zealand curriculum, you can talk about how these things are implemented in your classroom. That's a great way of you remembering how to implement the key competencies in your classroom. How do you do that? How do you explore the thinking part? How do you encourage your students to be critical thinkers? How do you do that? It might be through questioning, you know what I mean? Ample opportunity, right? Modeling what? Right? Modeling questioning, modeling thinking critically. How do I do that? Okay? Remember, don't expect your tauira to go and do what they need to do if you haven't modeled first. If you haven't modeled how to think critically, then don't expect your students to think critically. You have to model how to think critically. And so give me an example of how you're going to model thinking critically. All right? Then of course, managing self, relating to others, participating and contributing, and of course, the last one is using symbols. Cool? Yeah, those are just two examples that I can think of right now. And of course, if you're doing tapasa, have a look at the turu. 1, turu 2, turu 3. How are those things implemented in your classroom? If you're looking at Shina Cameron, ooh, great. How do you see those implemented in a classroom? It doesn't just have to be literacy. All right, I have used Shina Cameron's strategies in every curriculum area that I've taught. Everything, math most importantly. What's another framework? Kaikitia, have a look at the competencies in Kahikatia that will help you implement that in the classroom. That's what you're looking at. What else? Yeah, effective practice for literacy. How are you doing that in reading, in writing? Actually, effective literacy, how is that being implemented in your, not only, in your literacy, in the literacy program? For example, in the literacy program, we've got speaking, we've got listening, we've got viewing, we've got reading, we've got writing. How is the effective literacy implemented all of that?
Would it be kind of similar to literacy learning progression?
Absolutely. Yeah. What else? I'm just looking at the marking criteria for your report. It says, I'm looking at the booklet. So we've done part A, we've done part B. And part C here says, well-designed and informative, thoughtful visual that shows in-depth comparison and contrast of two selected frameworks. So in here, you could do your Venn diagram, all right? Venn diagram. On one side is, of course, one framework, and on the other, you write down what are the differences about it, and the similarity is obviously going to be in the middle. What's similar between these two here is going to be in the middle.
So it's just between our two frameworks.
Just your two framework, nothing else. Okay, that's with 10 marks, it says here. So part A, 15 marks. Part B that I've just talked about now is 15 marks. Visual graphic is 10 marks. I'm going to suggest do that's visually a Venn diagram to help you communicate what that looks like. That's part C. Part D, sorry, I've spoken about in terms of your education experiences to how your frameworks were established in your school, implemented, I should say. And then, of course, the last one is making sure that you've got references. In-text referencing is what I'm going to focus on this time around. I want to see how you are using in your writing those in-text referencing to help you capture or reference or acknowledge the documents that you are referring to.
Hello. You said every paragraph, if you're writing a paragraph, every paragraph.
Must have an in-text referencing. If you've written a paragraph and there's no reference there, that's warning bells going in my mind. What's happening here? Did you come up with this paragraph all by yourself? I mean, fantastic. You should have been one of the policy writers for those frameworks. But every time you write a paragraph, always thieves. Always reference, please. Kapai? Otherwise, I'll be like reference. It's important because when you do your own thesis, you'd want people to be acknowledging you and your mahi that you did for how many years?
So far, if even like each paragraph I've got my information from using curriculum, I can repeat it.
That's right.
Just repeat it. Okay.
NZC, Ministry of
Yeah,
Education,
yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
page,
Yeah.
If you use specific quotes, then you have to use quotation marks and provide page numbers. But if you haven't, just write, and if you've changed the wording, if you synthesized the paragraph into your own words, but you've used, particular ideas from a paragraph in the text, then you just use your Ministry of Education, whatever, and the year, and then that's enough.
Yeah.
Kapai?
At
Or
the end of your paragraph.
at the end of the paragraph. Okay? I just remember doing lots of that.
I'm charging $2.
Yeah.
I made fire repeat and say, so I'm charging $2.
Okay, so I've just gone blah. Apologies about that. Are we good?
Yes,
That was really helpful.